Welcome back to another Thursday on the Pagan Perspective. I'm your Thursday host, Yeka, and this week we've been talking about the challenges or struggles that we've gone through in our journey and the dark night of the soul and kind of strategies for addressing and dealing with that. So our topic comes from Brendan, who asks the collab, what has been the biggest challenge you have faced in your journey? Have you ever been through a dark night of the soul, and what got you through it? So, a little bit of context to start with before jumping into the question. For me, a very important theme in my practice as a pagan is focusing on the recognition of the sacred and the mundane as really being the same thing, as not actually being separate, but being completely intertwined, interwoven, and really just different faces of the same thing. So that context is really important for answering the question of the challenges that I've faced in my journey, because I consider the life challenges that I have faced to be part of my journey. I'm not separating between my pagan self and my other self, that it's all connected together. So it's hard to say what my biggest challenge has been. I've certainly gone through some very challenging periods in my life. I lost a parent at a very young age. I moved out pretty young. I was in a very abusive relationship that I had to leave, and that was, very challenging and left me with a lot of scars that have taken a lot of time to heal and still sometimes, crop up. And as a teenager and in my younger 20s, this is something that I've really been able to address now in my late 20s, but I also really struggled a lot with depression and with anxiety. So it's hard to pinpoint one specific point that was my biggest challenge, but to say that life has been sprinkled with them as well as with some incredible blessings in there. So I'm, in no means have any sort of woe is me approach or attitude towards that. In terms of the dark night of the soul, if that's being looked at as a period that was particularly challenging, yes, I've had, quite a few of those. If we're using the idea of that as being more of a crisis of faith, I can't really think of a time that I've had what feels like or would qualify as a crisis of faith, because I don't really have faith in a deity or faith in a particular institution or something like that. I think I have some very fundamental, deep-held beliefs, but those are more like a worldview, which I haven't had, which when they have changed have been gradual changes over time. I haven't had any sort of time of disbelief in those, just a recognition that they have in fact changed. Now, the big part of this question is kind of, how did we get through it? So it being the challenges, it being the crisis of faith, if we had that, or the dark night. And because there's so many different ones, it's hard to say specifically which one, what strategy worked. But I can say that for me, in the recent years, really having learned to manage the anxiety and the depression that used to really cripple me, in the recent years, the strategies that I've used that I think have really worked is the big ones. It's been a lot of self-learning, learning about myself, but getting a little bit more in tune and in sync with the natural patterns that I, as an animal, am with the rest of nature. So for instance, here's a really big one, is the sleep. And although in the past I got a decent amount of sleep, I wasn't always getting the scheduling right on that, or I really wasn't getting enough. I thought that I could get by on much less sleep than I've discovered that I really need. And so getting myself to sleep more, and my body, I've discovered, under normal circumstances, needs about 9 to 9.5 hours of sleep. And if I don't get that, then I am not able to face the world and face the strong emotions and the challenges that are coming at me and that I'm creating and that others are creating. It's much harder for me to be able to really meet those when I am exhausted, right? So dialing that in and figuring that out and working on sleep hygiene and working with making sure that I'm sleeping with the cycles, with the natural cycles of what's happening with the sun outside, and really figuring out my circadian rhythms. It doesn't seem like a big thing, but it actually made a huge impact on my ability to cope. And that's what I was saying at the beginning in terms of seeing the spiritual and the mundane as one. Incorporating more movement and really fixing some of the nutritional deficiencies that I had from some unfortunate choices, misinformed choices that I had made as a much younger person that led to some deficiencies that once I, over a process of several years corrected those, made a huge difference in my ability to deal with the smaller things that can add up and become overwhelming. The other really big one for me, those things I think can be sort of universal, that probably everyone could benefit from, making sure you've got the right sleep and movement and nutrition for the particular individual. But also finding out more about me as a person. We actually touched on this a couple months ago on the video that we talked about highly sensitive people and labels and all of that. I learned a little bit about me from learning about some diagnoses that I had had as a very young child, and then was able to see. Getting those labels allowed me to do some more research and find some community and find other people whose brains basically work in a similar way. And I'll share this with you, that I am an introvert, but I have a people threshold that I didn't really understand that I had before, and I've since learned that if I have, so contact with people isn't necessarily refreshing to me. A certain amount is, but it's actually really, really draining. And I've learned, and this is really just in the last few years, that depending on a lot of different factors, if I'm around people too much, it will push me into a place where I can easily have a kind of a breakdown around that, and that it's what I need to do is to be able to step back and have solitude and have quiet and move away from that to refresh, to regenerate, and then be able to step back into situation with people. And when I was younger, I didn't really fully get that about myself. I thought that I could push and push and push and push, and wasn't respecting that boundary that I didn't really know was there. And once I was able to recognize and learn what that boundary was for me, it has made a tremendous difference in my ability to cope and to manage how I feel as a person. And it has really helped me to address and manage the anxiety and depression, which has mostly been alleviated, which was something that, you know, plagued me for years and years and years. And I have to say there's, you know, of course other things involved too, but that was a big realization for me. And every person is going to have something very different. Some people, what I just said would be completely foreign and a terrible idea for them, because their relationship with their social relationships are very different, and they might gather and be revived from social interactions. My husband's one like that, you know, he's, that being around people is really helpful for him, where being around people can be very harmful for me. So everybody has different things, and it might not even have anything to do with the social. It might have, you know, I don't know. So finding I think that the more we learn about ourselves, the more power we have to be able to. Okay, so the battery, so it's telling me that I'm almost out of battery, so I gotta finish this. But basically that the more we learn about ourselves, the better strategies we can come up with to be able to help with dealing with the big stuff when it comes along, so that the little stuff doesn't trip us up and get in the way of us being able to really address whatever larger challenges are going on. So I don't think I made this as short a video as I was hoping to, but there we go. So yeah, I would love to hear from you folks what your experience with this is, if there's, you know, things that you have found that have helped you, if you feel moved to share anything. Love to hear that in the comments below, and I hope you have a wonderful week, and I will see you next week. Take care.